Hello students, this is Usha Sharma. I will continue the chapter 15, Framing the Constitution. In this chapter, we have learned about the history of the Indian Constitution. In this video, I will start the chapter with the topic, The Will of the People. A communist member, Somnath Lahiri, saw the dark hand of British imperialism hanging over the deliberations of the Constitution Assembly. In the winter of 1946 to 47, as the Assembly deliberated, the British were still in India, and it was only operated under the direction of the Viceroy and the British government in London. Nehru admitted that most nationalist leaders had wanted a different kind of constitution assembly. It was also true in a sense that the British government had a hand in its birth. But, emphasized Nehru, you must not ignore the source from which this assembly derives its strength. Nehru added, governments are the expression of the will of the people. We have met here today because of the strength of the people behind us, and we shall go as far as the people. The Constituent Assembly was expected to express the aspiration of those who had participated in the movement for independence. Democracy, equality, and justice were the ideas that had become intimately associated with social struggle in India since the 19th century. When Swami Vivekananda campaigned for the reforms of Hinduism, Jyotiba Phule in Maharashtra pointed to the suffering of the depressed caste. The national movement against a government that has seen as oppressive and illegal was inevitable a struggle for democracy and justice, for citizens' rights and equality. In fact, as the demand for representation grew, the British had been forced to introduce a series of constitutional reform. A number of acts were passed 1909, 1919 and 1935, gradually enlarging the space for Indian participation in provisional government. The legislature elected under the 1935 Act operated within the framework of colonial rule and were responsible for the governor appointed by the British. The vision that Nehru was trying to outline on December 13, 1946 was the constitution of an independent sovereign republic of India. Define rights. How were the rights of individual citizens to be defined? The problem with separate electorates. On 27 August 1947, B. Pokhar Bahadur from Madras made a powerful play for continuing separate electorates. Minorities exist in all lands, argued Bahadur. They could not be wished away. They could not be erased out of existence. Only separate electorates would ensure that Muslims had a meaningful voice in the governance of the country. This demand for separate electorates provoked anger and dismay amongst the nationalists. Most nationalists saw separate electorate as a measure deliberately introduced by the British to divide the people. The English play their game under the cover of safeguard. R.V. Dhulekar told Bahadur with the help of it they allowed you to a long lull. Give it up now. Now there is no one to misguide you. Separate electorates was a poison that has entered the body politics of our country, declared by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Countering the demand for separate electorates, Govind Vallabh Pant declared that it was not only harmful for the nation but also for the minorities. Govind Vallabh Pant said it was a suicidal demand. He argued that it would permanently isolate the minorities, make them vulnerable, and deprive them of any effective say within the government. Begum Azaz Rasool, for instance, felt that separate electorates were self-destructive since they isolated the minorities from the majority. By 1949, most Muslim members of the Constituent Assembly were agreed that separate electorates were against the interest of the minorities. We will need much more than this resolution. N.G. Ranga, father of the Indian peasant movement. While welcoming the objective resolution, N.G. Ranga, a socialist who had been a leader of the peasant, argued that the term minorities be interpreted in economic terms. The real minorities for Ranga were the poor and the downtrodden. He welcomed to the legal rights and constitution was granted to each individual but pointed to its limits. It was essential to create conditions where these constitutionally enshrined rights could be effectively enjoyed. For this, they need protection. They need props. They need a ladder, said Ranga. Jaipal Singh spoke eloquently on the need to protect the tribes and ensure conditions that could help them came up to the level of the general population. Tribes were not a numerically minorities, he argued, but they need protection. Singh was not asking for separate electorates, but he felt that reservation of seats in the legislature was essential to allow tribals to represent themselves. It would be a way, he said, of compelling others to hear the voice of tribals and come near them. During the national movement, Ambedkar demanded separate electorates for the depressed caste and Mahatma Gandhi had opposed it, arguing that this would permanently segregate them from the rest of the society. Society had used their services and labor but kept them at a social distance, refusing to mix with them or dine with them or allowed them enter into temples. Nagappa pointed out that numerically the depressed castes were not a minority. They formed between 20 to 25% of the total population. Addressing the assembly, K.J. Khanderkar of the central provinces said, "We were suppressed for thousands of years, suppressed to such an extent that neither our mind nor our bodies and now even our hearts work. Nor are we able to march forward. This is the position." A few questions arose after this long and hot debate. How could the Constituent Assembly resolve this opposition? What kinds of protection were the depressed castes to be provided? At last, the Constituent Assembly finally recommended that untouchability be abolished, Hindu temples be thrown open to all castes, seats in legislatures and job in government offices be reserved for the lower caste. Many reconsidered that this could not solve all problems. Social discrimination could not be raised only through constitutional legislation. There had to be a change in the attitude within society. But the measures were welcomed by the democratic public. Thank you, class.